Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode. I'm actually going to go over 4 questions. You're going to add in a bonus one for today. So let's dive into the questions. Just as a reminder, so I do a weekly Q&A on Mondays on Instagram. So if you want your questions answered, just hop over there. That question box will be up on Monday. So again, if you have any questions that you'd want answered, again, that would be the place to go from there. So let's go into it. So if you're overweight and building muscle, you have to lose some muscle for a healthy weight. No. So it's funny, as I was reading this question, I could see where you could take this question 2 ways. Okay. So I'm going to take it first. And hey, say you have muscle and you're overweight and you need to lose body fat or you need to lose weight, right? Someone says, hey, you're overweight, you need to lose weight. In that process, do you need to lose muscle in that process of getting down, and is it going to happen? And so that's how I'm going to take it first. And then I think the second way you could take it is if you're overweight and you're trying to build muscle to lose muscle in that process to get to a healthy weight. So again, I guess maybe it actually ends up being the same question. So I am going to just answer it the same way. Man, sometimes with these questions, you can see where it goes either way. Anyway, so I think no matter what, the goal in this process, if you are overweight, is to not lose muscle, right? Like we would not want to lose muscle. I think in these situations, people drastically overestimate how much muscle they have, right? Oh, hey, I'm overweight because I have a lot of muscle. Look, I'm sorry, but in most cases, in most situations, that's not the case, right? And they underestimate how much body fat they have. Again, you probably have way more body fat than you think. And so that's why I'm saying in this situation, like the goal would be to not lose muscle. Now, are you going to lose maybe a little bit? Potentially, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that's not going to be the case. But again, the goal would be to make sure that you don't. And I think if we do this correctly, we're really going to limit how much muscle we lose and hopefully underestimate or and make sure we don't lose or just lower how much muscle we would potentially lose in this situation. But again, I think if you're overweight, it's less, again, when it comes to body composition, usually, like I said, usually in this situation, people are going to have way more body fat than they think and way less muscle than they think. Now, in an extreme case, when if somebody did have a ton of muscle in this process and maybe they still have a lot of body fat as well too, and they're still like technically overweight, you could lose muscle if you wanted to. That would ultimately be up to you, but we would still try to reduce how much body fat you have because again, from a body comp standpoint, we want to make sure that we have muscle. It's a hard thing to get. I think people drastically underestimate how hard it is to build muscle. And so when you do get it's just very helpful in today's modern environment. And so the goal would be to not lose that like any muscle. Again, you probably wouldn't feel great in the process and you're just hurting yourself because you probably don't have as much muscle as you actually think you do there. So I think this, again, for most people, they just don't have enough muscle for this to even be a problem. But in saying this does bring up a good point that yeah, being even if you have a lot of muscle and you're say in the obese category from like a BMI standpoint, that's not going to be great from a long-term health perspective. Again, you may look awesome, you may look super jacked, but from an overall health standpoint, long-term health aspects, it's probably not the greatest. And anytime we're way above, like our bodies aren't designed to be super overweight. And again, it's not a great thing for the system. So even if it is muscle, like yes, ideally, if you're going to be overweight, we want to try to build as much muscle as possible. But again, too much can be an issue. In saying this, most people aren't going to get there. Most people who are just training regularly, they're just not going to get there naturally. This is more so for people who are on some sort of anabolic steroids or something like that. So somebody like that, they would need to maybe focus on this a little bit more. But again, the person asking this, I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but you just don't have as much muscle as you think you do, and you have more body fat. And in this process, we still want to try to lose as much body fat as possible because high levels of body fat, just from a metabolic health standpoint, overall health standpoint, is not a good thing to have. Again, our bodies are not supposed to have that much body fat on them. And you can see because the body, compensates. And this is where you see things like insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, all these things start to show up because of the fact that, we have too much body fat, too much weight, and too much body fat in general. But the big thing being too much body fat, like we talked about being overweight. Again, if you're in the overweight category and you have a good amount of muscle, I wouldn't be too concerned. If you're in the obese category, no matter what, whether you have a lot of muscle or you don't, which chances are most people are not going to have too much muscle in that category. We probably, from an overall health perspective, want to get you down. We want to get some weight off. And again, probably body fat. So in saying this, if you do these things I'm about to talk about, we don't really need to worry about losing muscle, especially if you are someone who is overweight and has a good amount of body fat to lose, right? So first, we want to lift weights. Obviously, that's going to send that signal to build muscle and to keep it. So no matter what, if we're lifting weights in the process, the chances of us losing muscle are going to be slim to none. We really have to be screwing up these other things for it to happen. So again, what you commonly see here, people want to lose weight and they don't lift in the process. Do I think you need to lift 6 days a week? No, but we want to make sure we lift at least 2 to 3 days per week. And then the rest of the time we can do more movement-based stuff, cardio stuff that's going to burn calories there. We want to try to avoid large deficits. So we probably don't want to lose more than like 1% of our body weight per week for extended periods of time. You could lose 1% for a short period of time, but in the long term, you probably don't want to go much higher than 1% of body weight per week, because I do think that at that point you will start to be at a higher risk of losing muscle. And, from an adherence standpoint, it is just going to be really challenging to do that. We want to make sure we eat enough protein per day. So this could be around 1 gram per pound of body weight. If you are overweight, maybe it's closer to your 1 gram of your ideal body weight. But again, we want to make sure we eat enough protein. Not only is it going to help you maintain your lean body mass and potentially build some, but it's also going to help with satiety as well too. And that's going to help you stick to that calorie deficit that you need to drop weight. And then lastly, get enough sleep and get quality of sleep too, right? It's not just getting 8 hours of sleep. It's also making sure that quality of sleep is there and you're getting well rested sleep and you're feeling good there. So again, if we do those things and you're overweight, the chances of you losing any muscle in that process are going to be slim to none, right? And also keep this in mind too. Like I said, most people probably don't have as much muscle as they think. When you're at these higher body weights, and you have higher body fat percentage and you start lifting weights and you do these things that I talked about here, there's a good chance you're going to actually build a little bit of lean mass in this process. Now, if you start losing 2% of your body weight per week, that's going to start to be a little bit more challenging there. And the longer you try to drop weight, the leaner you get, the slower this is, the less muscle you'll build, and it's more about maintaining it. But at the end of the day, if you were to take a DEXA or some sort of body scan, it's probably going to say you lose lean mass. I would say that's probably more so from like a glycogen standpoint. You're just a little bit more depleted in the weight loss process. So I think that would be more so where you would see that. But again, I think the big takeaway here is if you're in the higher than overweight category or at the high end of the overweight category, chances are it's not because you have too much muscle, it's because you have too much body fat. And that is something that we would want to lose. We don't need to worry about the muscle side of things here. There. Hopefully that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions on that. All right. So second question is, refeed type of day in a fat loss phase, is it worth it? Real quick, what is a refeed day? So typically it's a day where you're at higher calories, right? A lot of times people think when they fat loss diet, they need to go straight through. Hey, every single day I need to be in a deficit. I need to drop weight day over day, week over week. And a refeed is just a day where you increase your calories to maintenance. And again, I'm going to go over some things you need to know, but again, that's typically what it is, right? It's just a higher calorie day within a fat loss phase. But what I will say on this is, yes, 100% it's worth it. And honestly, it's probably the most underutilized fat loss tool out there. But we need to make sure we manage it correctly. And it's not a free-for-all, right? If you turn this refeed day into a free-for-all during a fat loss phase, this is going to lead to you spinning your wheels. So we do want to make sure we don't do that. So I'm going to go over 5 things that you need to know about refeeds here. So first, it's not magic. So just because we add in a higher calorie day doesn't mean there's any fat loss. There's no magic to it. If anything, it can be helpful from an adherence standpoint. It can help people maybe feel a little less hunger. It can help them feel like they don't have to be overly rigid, which in turn helps adherence long-term, which is ultimately what we're trying to get when we're trying to fat loss diet. It's how can we set up your nutrition that gets you into a deficit where you can sustain that and actually get into a deficit and stay there for extended periods of time? Because people know how to get into a deficit, right? They just don't eat or they fast or whatever it may be, but they can only do that for the short term. They don't have the strategies to do that for extended periods of time for them to actually stick with it and actually stay in a deficit and see the fat loss that they want to see. Again, people do it in the short term, but it's usually in this crash dieting style and they end up losing lean body mass in the process. They don't feel good. And then again, it's hard to actually stick to. And from a body comp standpoint, we actually don't see the body composition change that you want because we're not prioritizing losing body fat. Again, that's really the key here with fat loss is how can we do this for multiple weeks on end, but then also in a position where you're not going to lose lean body mass, right? You're going to ideally lose muscle or not muscle, lose body fats. Again, that's the challenge. So again, there's no magical benefit to, you're not going to increase calorie burn or anything like that. There's been some research that has shown that maybe like a small increase in BMR, your basal metabolic rate. So like your total daily energy expenditure might be a little bit higher. I think it was like 30 something calories. So to me, that's just like potential just air there with that. So really my thought would be, hey, we want to use it for the adherence side of things, the mental side of things. And if there is maybe some small kind of like fat loss benefit, that would just be an added bonus, but we're not going to rely on that, right? But at the end of the day, there's really no magic to them other than, again, it can be a tool to help with adherence there. And I'll also talk about, there's another thing in here that I think it can be helpful with. We want to make sure we limit adding a ton of tasty food. So again, what you want to be careful with here is you do a refeed day and then all of a sudden you just add in a ton of tasty food. Well, that's not great. Again, you're probably going to overconsume calories. So you want to make sure that the foods you choose are probably very similar to your diet type foods, but maybe just in a little bit more quantities. Again, let's just take a meal of chicken, broccoli, and rice just to simplify things here. Maybe you do a little bit extra olive oil, and then maybe you have a extra serving of rice, right? That's typically how you do it. And then you would do that across the day, or you could do it in one meal. But again, just to give an example here, but we do want to be careful with, oh, hey, I have a refeed day and I'm going to have a bunch of candy. I'm going to have a bunch of cakes. I'm going to have a bunch of pizza. Like, we can strategically put that stuff in, but if that's why we do it, or that's all we do for that day, you're going to spin your wheels, right? So that, again, we don't want to go crazy with it. 3, it can take stress off. So dieting is a stressor on the body. And I'm sure you've been here before where you've been losing weight and then all of a sudden your weight just doesn't budge, right? A lot of times it's stress related, especially more so in women than men, but it can be stress related where it's like dieting, again, it's hard on the body. And again, I think for women in particular, because women need more essential body fat and they just need more body fat in general. I just think that it's a little bit of a harder process on the female body to just constantly be in a deficit and just push a deficit straight through, and large deficits. And again, anything that's really going to tell the body that there's a lack of energy, I think it's going to be a little bit more stressful on the female body than the male body. And then on top of it, women also have hormones. Men have hormones too, but women's are a little bit more complex, right? And there's that just a lot more going on there than there is with men. So what I've seen is this can take stress off. So I've seen this multiple times where like clients will be like, they have a lot going on. They're like, man, I'm just pushing it, or I'm just staying on top of it. My weight's actually up this week. It's like, all right, hey, let's do it. We have either they have a planned refeed day or we decide to take one. And then boom, they do that. And then their weight's down 2 or 3 pounds the next day. And again, that's the stress. That's your body stopped holding on to that water. And again, that's the stress response, right? So I've seen this take stress off a ton. So again, there's a physiological lowering of the stress, but again, mentally as well too. Having a day where you can just, you have a little bit more flexibility can go a long way mentally. 4, it probably helps with lean body mass. Again, I think from a deficit is hard on the body, and the more weight you lose, the leaner you get, the longer you go, the more aggressive it is, we're going to start to risk lean body mass loss. And so by having these periods or days where we consume a little bit more calories, it's going to tell your body, hey, it's okay. You don't need to lose. We don't need to pull from our lean body mass. We are getting some energy in. And so again, you think over the long term, it's going to help with lean body mass. Just again, I don't have any hard data on that, but I just think thinking it out, like, it makes sense. It's not going to be worse for lean body mass if you do it that way anyways, plus all the other benefits that I talked about there. And again, you may get better workouts, which in turn could help with muscle growth. Again, maybe I don't think it's going to be this like night and day difference where someone's going to have 5 extra pounds of muscle because they did refeeds, but any little bit counts in this when we're in a fat loss phase. To me, it's going to help with lean body mass. You're going to have a better look as you get down. So 5 is, it may make your fat loss phase a bit longer, just because, again, those are days that you're not in a deficit. But if you're not, those days that you're not in a deficit can help you actually stick to it longer. You may end up losing more body fat long term. But if for whatever reason someone dieted straight through, they didn't need a refeed, they felt good, they didn't have any days of refeed, then you have somebody else who incorporated 1 to 2 refeed days a week, or 1 every other week, or whatever it is, whatever frequency they use. The person who diets straight through is going to lose more body fat because that's more time that they're actually losing body fat. Whereas the person who took refeeds had those days where they weren't. But again, there's so many different things that go into that, right? Just generally speaking, the more you use a refeed, it's just going to extend that fat loss phase a bit longer. I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing in the world either. But again, from a lean body mass perspective, I think that it's even better. Again, we may not necessarily get there as quick, but we're going to have a better look as we get down, and we're more likely to actually stick to a fat loss diet and stick with it long term versus not doing that. Again, it may make it a little bit longer, but again, that's okay. If you don't have a time, and most people don't, right? Most people aren't going to need to be at, hey, you have to be at 13% body fat by this day. Otherwise, something bad's really going to happen. Again, that's not going to be the case. The only time that you would have a time constraint is if you have some sort of like competition where you have to be a certain weight, or you have a bodybuilding competition. But even then, I would think that incorporating some refeed days is going to be super helpful, but you just have to time it out and plan it out there. Whereas for Gen Pop, if you're just trying to lose some body fat, you can we can take time. We don't have to get there at any one particular time. Again, just a final few tips here. We want to make sure we get to maintenance calories. Again, probably going to increase via carbs and fats, probably mostly carbs, but depending on where your macros are at, but we want to get to your maintenance calories. 2, you can really use them as often as you need. Like I said, the only downside is the more often you use them, the longer your fat, like you're just not going to lose the same amount of fat as somebody who dieted straight through. But you may end up being leaner because you can actually stick with it long term. But again, if you want to do it 3 to 4 times a week, you could certainly do that. It's just, again, going to take you a lot longer to get there. So again, we can really use them as often as we need, especially if we manage them well and we stay at maintenance. Because if you think about it, you're just going to be at maintenance. You're not going to be gaining any body fat or anything like that. So you're not going to be going backwards. And then it may be a good idea to do them around your tough workouts as well too, right? Just a few extra tips there with that. All right, so next question is, anything in particular women in their 40s need to focus on from a body comp standpoint? Again, we want to look at body comp. When we talk body comp, we're looking at, hey, fat mass, muscle mass, right? And again, most people just look at their scale weight, but we want to make sure that we prioritize muscle. Again, this doesn't mean that you just need to have as much muscle as possible, but we want to prioritize muscle. Most people don't do that, and they just focus on scale weight, and that leads to them not feeling as great and not looking as good as they can. So what are some things women in particular in their 40s need to focus on? So how I mentioned, again, women, I think typically women need, it's more important for them to have essential levels of body fat. It's important for men and women, but women need a little bit higher, and it's probably slightly more important for them to have that. So here again, we want to make sure we avoid large calorie deficits. So we don't want to be in this massive calorie deficit where you're trying to lose more than 1% of your body weight per week. Honestly, I think 0.75, 0.5% of body weight loss per week is perfect for this avatar. And again, we want to make sure part of that is the stress response, but also lean body mass. Again, for women in their 40s, too much muscle is typically not going to be an issue, right? 99.9% of the time, it's not going to be an issue. The issue is going to be not having enough lean body mass. So we need to protect it as much as possible from a bone health perspective, but also just mostly the bone health perspective, right? But it's because it's the things that you do in the process of building muscle that helps you maintain your bone with your bone health, right? So again, we want to make sure we prioritize lean body mass and obviously bone health and everything like that. 2, we want to avoid extended periods of time weight loss dieting. So we also probably don't want to just diet like throughout the entire year. Now, you could go a little bit slower. You could throw in refeed days like we just talked about, and that could be a very good strategy for you. But either way, I would avoid extended periods of time trying to lose weight. Take some time to sit at your maintenance, really focus on that, build some lean body mass, and you're good to go. But again, we want to avoid those extended periods of time weight loss dieting. Again, we want to lift weights with the goal to build muscle. Even if you just want to look more toned or you want to be a little bit leaner, we still want to weight train with the goal of building muscle for all the reasons I mentioned already. We want to make sure we eat enough protein overall. Again, we can do all the weight training in the world, but if we're not getting in enough protein, you're not going to build as much muscle, lean body mass as you could. And we want to try to get those around your workouts too. You want to avoid extended periods of time without food in general, right? If you're somebody who is focused on lean body mass, I think in general, but for women that are over 40 in particular, we want to make sure we're not going too long around our workouts without getting any protein in. So again, you could do it 1 hour before, then you can give yourself an hour or 2 afterwards. If you don't eat protein for say 2 to 3 hours before your workout, then you want to get it in maybe closer to 1 hour post workout. If you go into your workout 3 to 4 plus hours without protein, then you want to try to get that protein in as soon as possible afterwards. So it really depends on what you do on the front end, which impacts what you do on the back end there. And again, we just generally want to limit extended periods of time without eating. Extended fasting protocols, probably not great for this avatar. Again, you're seeing a common kind of reoccurrence here of we want to avoid being in a deficit as often as possible for this clientele, for this avatar. So again, it's okay. We want to avoid large calorie deficits. We want to avoid extended periods of time dieting, and we want to avoid we want to avoid extended periods of time without eating around your workout, right? So that's really the main takeaway here. And what do most people in this demographic do? They try to eat as little as possible. They try to fast, do all the things that they could do to just lower their caloric intake because they want to drop weight. And again, that's from a body comp standpoint, that's probably the worst thing you can do for this demographic. And even for any demographic, but especially this one, these would be the things I would really be focusing on there. All right, so last question of the day. Do you think there's still benefit to getting protein and calorie closer to the end of your workout? there's been this kind of talk of, oh, the post-workout anabolic window, it's not important, right? It's just your total protein intake for the day, which I still think is true. We need to be more focused on our total protein intake for the day. But in saying that, I do think there's some benefit to still getting protein and calories around your workout closer to the end of it. I think if anything, it's a safe bet. You just don't need to overly stress about getting protein in right after your workout, especially if we had that food beforehand, right? But in saying that, I think all things considered, I still would like you to get protein in an hour or so after your workout, and not much longer. Again, like I said, it's just, if anything, it's a safe bet. It's a way to bump up your total protein intake for the day. And it's just a kind of easy to implement thing there, and a good habit to get into, right? Because the big thing is we just want to avoid those extended periods of time after our workouts without getting anything in there. So yes, total protein intake for the day is most important. But if we were to prioritize any one time of day or to get protein in, it would be around your workouts, particularly afterwards there. So that's it for this episode. Let me know if you guys have any questions on this. If you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. Again, I want to continue to get this out to more and more people. So I appreciate everybody who listens. Also, if you do the Spotify thing and they give you your year in review, share it to social media. It'd be super helpful to, again, expand the podcast. But again, I appreciate everybody who listens. If you haven't yet, give me a follow on Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. You can ask me any questions. You can ask me questions that come on here, anything like that. Just a DM away there if you have any questions. And then lastly, if you're someone who you're in your 40s as a female and you struggle with knowing what to do from a body comp standpoint, or you're wondering if you need to or you're just someone who wonders if you need to add in refeed days or how to make sure you limit muscle loss in the weight loss process, then my free 30-minute strategy calls for you. We'll go over what your biggest challenge is, and then we'll map out a game plan to make sure you get around that and reach your goal. So if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. That's it for this episode. Chat with you guys next time.